Okay, I'm Captain Rob Donaldson from the 37th Attack Fighter Wing flying F-117s, based in Tonopah, Nevada, but we live in Las Vegas, Nevada.
What's the general impression about finally flying combat missions compared to training and the long wait to get here in some?
Well, it's kind of a relief to finally get started on the whole thing. My general impression about the whole start of it was I'm glad we got started, but it was a little bit of a shock to see all the AAA that they threw up at us the very first night. I feel that the training I've had over the past 10 years of flying in the Air Force has well prepared me for the first mission. The only thing was that I'd never been shot at before for real in training and everything, and that was probably the biggest surprise. But other than that, the discipline and tactics and procedures that we use in training are the exact same that we're using here in wartime. So it was good that we had about 6 months to get prepared here in Saudi Arabia to learn the lay of the land and to know the enemy. That helped immensely rather than start from a cold start kind of thing. So we used the time real wisely, 5 to 6 months that we had. We trained real hard, and there's nothing different that we're doing now than we did different when we pretty much first got here as far as tactics and flying go. The only thing is that they're mad and they're shooting. So and the other thing is we're getting to at least shoot back now too. So that's about the only difference. Yeah.
What was your first combat mission?
Well, I went the very first night, 16th, 17th of January, down to Kuwait. I was the only guy the only F-117 that was fragged to go to hit two targets in Kuwait. That was again, it was just everything. The tanker, takeoff out of here, rendezvous with the tanker was just like we had done every night before. Went up to the border and dropped off with from the tanker there, and everybody else went to Baghdad or to northwest Saudi Arabia there at H2, H3, and I went southeast down to Kuwait. I remember getting a real dry mouth crossing the border, and that's about the only real, I guess, physical thing that I remember happening. I went down, and just before I turned south, pretty much south to make my first target run there, I looked off on the right-hand side and I saw what appeared to be flares. At least that was my first impression. And I went, oh gosh, they're shooting flares. And then it took about a nanosecond later, and it was, those aren't flares, that's AAA, and they're shooting at me. And then it just opened up all around me, all over the place. I was down pretty low. I was trying to get below a weather deck to get my bombs off. And the stuff was just going off all around me. And I guess the best description to use is take the best 4th of July fireworks show you've ever seen, multiply it by 1,000 times, and that's about what it was like all around my cockpit. But again, like going back to the other thing is the training was, the training that we've done over the past 10 years and the past 6 months here kicked in, and it was, just press on, business as normal. I don't really remember ever being afraid at that time. It was just too much happening to think about it. I was engrossed in trying to find my target and drop the bombs on it. And unfortunately, I was weathered out. So they got to shoot everything at me that night, and I didn't get to shoot back at them. And we just don't indiscriminately let our bombs go. If we don't see the target, we just we suck it up and come on home. So I remember, and coming back, I had a long way to go to find the tanker again. And found him and got my wingman on, and we talked on the way back and asked, hey, did you hear from so-and-so, or did you hear this other guy check in? And we said no, and so I thought we'd lost a couple airplanes the first night, and it was a long trip home, believe me. Coming back here, when I landed, the crew chiefs told me that everybody had returned, that all the F-117s had come back, and I didn't believe them because I just couldn't believe that anybody would have survived through all that AAA. But sure enough, after he told me about the third time, and then other people nodded their heads and said, yeah, everybody made it back, and went, gosh, that was more of a relief than anything. So that's pretty much what the first night was for me in combat.
How's it been after one?
After that, it's been the first missions, probably 1 or 2 through 5 or whatever. I went to Baghdad, and they were shooting quite a bit, as much up there as they were down in Kuwait the first night. And it depends upon where you are in the attack wave there. If you're one of the first guys through, they don't see you, and they don't start shooting until the bombs go off. If you're one of the last guys through, and they keep on shooting, and you look out there and you can see everything going off, and you go, well, I got to go through it, but and you do. But since then, it's kind of slacked off as far as the AAA goes. Sometimes they only shoot after the bombs go off, and then they quit after about 3 or 4 minutes. And sometimes they don't shoot at all. Last night it was downtown Baghdad, and hardly a shot fired. So I don't know if they're running out or if they're conserving. I hope it's the first.
Yeah. Think stealth technology would help on everything.
Absolutely. I think the stealth technology, I wouldn't want to be in any other airplane than this one right here. We proved early on, when the war had not started yet, that stealth technology worked. And we took a couple of missions up close to the border with Iraq, and there was no change in any of their activity as far as them noticing that we were up there close to their border. So we knew early on that we could get through them, and we did the first night. So we're very confident in the technology that Lockheed put inside this airplane, and very comfortable with it. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be in any other airplane in any other war than the F-117 right now. Yeah.
Any comments about how to make this voice?
They've been fantastic, and I lost track of how many missions I've flown so far, but I have not ground aborted one at all. The airplanes have worked fine. I've gotten all my bombs off. I have nothing but high praise for the maintenance guys. They're really out there busting their hump, trying to make this airplane work, and it's a pretty sophisticated piece of machinery. So they've got they've got their work cut out for them. But young kids out there doing a bang up job keeping these airplanes in good shape. Yeah.
Any other comments, suggestions you want to make?
No, it's I don't know. It's kind of settled down now into we just go up there every night and do our thing and come back. And I think we've had a monumental impact on this war. I think the Air Force probably wishes they had about 5 more wings of F-117s. And we've been the only ones to go downtown Baghdad. Nobody else will go. And they've asked us to. We've hit everything from buildings in downtown Baghdad to bunkers, chemical warfare bunkers, aircraft bunkers, command posts, you name it, and we've hit it. And they've asked us to do a lot of cleanup work for aircraft that couldn't get through to other targets, F-111s or F-15Es, things like that had a hard time getting through the defenses to hit other targets. They've tasked us to go clean up for them. So we've done just about everything there is to hit almost all the targets that are available to us, as far as a wide variety of them go. And we're just trying to do our best to get this over with as quick as possible, and with the a minimum amount of loss of life on the coalition side.
How do you feel about the other pilots? Flying with them?
What other pilots?
The other pilots. How do you feel about them?
Oh, well, these are probably the most fantastic set of guys I've ever flown with. Of course, combat always brings you a little bit closer in a situation like this to your comrades and your fellow pilots and everything. But it's a pretty stringent selection process to get into the unit. Everybody's handpicked, and it's a selectively manned unit. So the guys are great guys to start with, and this thing has just brought everybody closer, and it's something that you'll never forget. And the people that you fly with in combat are the names and the faces are imprinted forever on you. Yeah.
Think you'll make it to a 10-year class with me?
Yeah, we're talking about it already. You bet. Yeah. We this is a once in a lifetime thing. It's a very small unit. They only built 59 F-117s, and it's a very unique airplane and a very unique set of circumstances with a unique set of people. So yeah, we've already been talking about 10-year, 15-year reunions and things like that. You bet. Yeah.
It is impossible to imagine what fighting in combat is like unless we have actually done that. Two more of our country's heroes are with us today to share their experiences fighting in seven different conflicts from Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan. Jim Lawrence is a retired Marine captain. He's also a retired naval aviator, rank of commander. And he is a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel. Only he can explain all of that. He has over 35,000 flight hours, 7,700 in single-seat aircraft, 3 combat tours flying over Laos, North and South Vietnam, then Bosnia and Afghanistan. His first carrier landing, or trap as naval aviators call it, was flying the Navy T-2B jet trainer at age 19. Among his aircraft, the Navy F-8 Crusader, the A-4 Skyhawk, and the O-1 Bird Dog, all in combat before he turned 22. Then came the A-7 Corsair and the A-10 Warthog over Bosnia, and the King Air 350 over Afghanistan. He retired from Western and Delta as a captain after 35 years with the airlines. Michael Durant is a retired Chief Warrant Officer 4 Army aviator. Over 22 years active duty, he flew 150 medevac missions in UH-1 Huey and UH-60 helicopters. Then air assault missions assigned to the 101st Aviation Battalion at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. He participated in combat Operation Prime Chance to protect American-flagged oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. Operation Just Cause, the U.S. invasion of Panama. And Operation Desert Storm, where he was the first helicopter pilot to engage a Scud missile launcher. Flying with the 160th Special Operations Regiment, SOAR, on October 3, 1993, he was the second Black Hawk helicopter to crash in Mogadishu, Somalia, where he was seriously injured and taken prisoner. He was released after 11 days in captivity. His 3 crewmates and 2 Army snipers were killed trying to fight off hostile Somalis. Durant retired with 3,700 flight hours, 1,400 of those hours on night goggles. He wrote a New York Times bestseller, In the Company of Heroes, about his career and his experiences in Somalia. In 2008, Durant was inducted into the Army Aviation Hall of Fame. Both gentlemen are highly decorated. Jim Lawrence, Distinguished Flying Cross, 36 Air Medals, 2 Single Mission Medals, and many, many more. Michael Durant, Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster, Bronze Star with V device, the Purple Heart, 3 Air Medals, the POW Medal, and many, many more. Jim.
Sir?
Oh, God, don't call me sir. Darn. You just heard it. You're a Marine, and I'd heard, once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine, but you retired from the Marines and became a naval officer and aviator. And then you retired from the Marine Corps and became an Air Force pilot. Now, what was this all about, Jim?
I just couldn't keep a steady job.
Michael, he missed Army aviation. I mean, how hurt are your feelings?
It's not over yet. I mean, maybe he's saving the best for last.
Right. Jim, start us off, would you? In all your flying, start with, what, the A-4 in Vietnam?
Yes, sir. We had, when I got my wings, we went overseas, deployed to Chu Lai, Vietnam. And I was assigned, I was a young lieutenant, 21 years old. And I was assigned to VMA 211 out of Chu Lai and was flying combat missions there. And then they asked for volunteers to go to the Bird Dog as a FAC. And being 21, I figured, what could possibly go wrong? And so I volunteered to go be a FAC. So that's how.
So you went from flying A4 at 400 or 500 miles an hour to flying a bird dog at what, 90 miles an hour
On a good day,
on a good day? So what does that really say about you? I mean,
that I'm a really slow learner.
tell me about the bird dog missions.
The bird dog mission was probably one of the more rewarding because we were working with our ground troops in heavy contact, as you know, Michael certainly understands. And our mission in the bird dog was to find the bad guys, well, depending on which side you're on, and which was usually not very difficult. And we would work with our ground troops. We would then identify the targets, bring in fighters. Because we were fighter pilots, we knew the capabilities of the aircraft. We knew the ordnance because we had been doing it. And I love it. Anyway, then we would control the tactical fighters. We controlled F-4 Phantoms, A-4 Skyhawks, F-100s, and we controlled naval gunfire off of the battleship New Jersey. I controlled her about a dozen times, and the Newport News cruiser, and then Marine and Army artillery. So
How often were you shot at? I mean, how dangerous is that flying at that altitude?
well, it got pretty sporting every now and then, but probably I would say 90% of our missions we took ground fire. In fact, the names on the side of my airplane are my squadron mates who were shot down and killed in action while we were flying the bird dog. We could only fly it for 6 months because the loss rate was so high. So that's as memorial to my buddies that didn't come home.
Yeah. Michael, helicopters, of course, since Vietnam. How significant, since Vietnam especially, have helicopters become?
Well, I think, I haven't served in Afghanistan or Iraq in these recent conflicts, but what I understand about the utilization of helicopters in general is they're almost the Jeeps of the modern battlefield. I mean, you're moving stuff, you're hauling troops. There's so many things that you can do with them. And it's, when there's an IED threat, which there is on the ground, obviously, it's often considered a safer way to move people and equipment and things around. Now, who would ever thought we'd get to the point where we think flying helicopters around is safer than riding on roads? But it is, and I think if you took helicopters away from the commanders on the battlefield today, you'd really limit their ability to do what they need to do.
Now, you're Huey flying in medevac. Where were your medevac missions, and how dangerous were they?
Well, I've always said that being assigned to medevac as my first assignment out of flight school was the greatest thing that could have happened, although it didn't feel that way at the time. A lot of what ends up happening in our lives is luck and chance and good fortune. So I didn't really want to go do that, but that was the assignment. And when I got there, I realized it was a fantastic assignment because in medevac, I had to progress to pilot and command status pretty fast. I did it like in 3 months. If I'd have gone to what we would call a lift battalion or a utility battalion, I probably wouldn't have been pushed that fast forward, because when you're in medevac, you're flying by yourself all the time. And although it's not combat, it's usually a real world mission. So there are potentially lives on the line. So there's a lot of decision making, a lot of autonomy. And for a new pilot, that's the kind of stuff you got to get exposed to, because you start to learn. I mean, you're going to make mistakes, and that's how you learn. You learn from making them.
How did you come to helicopters as opposed to wanting to fly fixed wing or something else?
Yeah, it's the first aircraft that I really got to go spend any time in was a helicopter. And I just thought that it was the coolest thing in the world. I was 14 years old. I'll never forget that first flight. And, I'm thinking, what am I going to do in my life? Am I going to go, work in the mill? I come from a mill town. Nothing against it, but is that my career aspiration? Or do I want to do what this guy's doing over here that seems to be having a blast, and he's getting paid to do it? So from that moment on, I really set that as my target.
And where were you flying medevac missions?
In Korea. My medevac assignment was in Korea, and I enjoyed it so much I extended. Normally we're there for a year, but I extended and spent 20 months there.
And what were your experiences there?
Challenging, but very rewarding. It's pretty difficult terrain for helicopters. A lot of mountains, a lot of wires. Seoul's a big city. You got the DMZ, so there's a lot of things that you're dealing with there, and don't have a lot of time to plan. It's a medevac mission, so the phone rings, you got to go, and you're out the door. So as I said, it's a really good place to develop those decision-making skills and aviation skills.
Physically, when the bell rings, as you just suggested, how long does it take to get a helicopter off the ground? What's the process of being able to actually fly? How long does it take?
I mean, you can start it in about 3 minutes if you really want to. Now, that's oddly enough, legacy aircraft are easier to start than current generation aircraft, because in some of the newer aircraft, you got to get things spun up and get alignments to occur, with the navigation systems and all that. But in these older aircraft, push the button, advance the throttles, and go. Doesn't mean you haven't done all the procedures you're supposed to do, but you do those ahead of time,
Right.
so you can get the aircraft off the ground in just a few minutes.
So, Jim, Bosnia, the A-10. So you've already flown a bunch of airplanes and you move into the A-10. Describe what it's like to fly that airplane and why is it effective?
The A-10 is truly amazing airplane in its own self. It's the premier close air support aircraft. Let me just regress for a second and say something about the dust-off Army medevac guys. When I was flying the Bird Dog and flying the A-4 in Vietnam, the Army dust-off medevac helicopter guys were some of the absolute bravest, most amazing guys that I have ever supported and watched in action. These guys would go in and pull out our wounded, Marines or Army, it didn't matter. But when dust-off got the call, they went in and they did it. And it was just utterly amazing, Michael, what you guys did. And
well, those were my predecessors, but it sort of set the culture for medevac and certainly all Army aviation.
absolutely. The dust-off guys, well, there's children and ladies here, but they carried certain parts of their anatomy around in a wheelbarrow.
I might add that the last few years, retired Army General Pat Brady, Medal of Honor recipient. And Pat was supposed to have been with us today, but his wife has some health issues. But our hope is that General Brady will be back with us next year.
Yeah, I'm sorry now, back to your original question
Yeah,
about the
that's
A-10.
fine.
The A-10 is a very unique aircraft. If you listen to any of the grunts, grunts being infantry, guys on the ground, they love the A-10. It can carry a lot of ordnance, and it can stay on station a long time. It can put pressure on the target over and over again. And then with the 30-millimeter cannon that fires 70 rounds a second, we carried 1,142 bullets. And it is just the premier close air support aircraft. I know they're trying to replace it with the F-35, but it's just not the same.
Yeah, what's your view of that? And it's in the media all the time about those who want to keep the airplane and those who want to get rid of it.
Well, those that want to keep the airplane know what they're doing. And you talk to the infantry guys, and the only airplane, not to say that the F-16 and the F-18 aren't great airplanes, because they are. I mean, they're fantastic airplanes in their own way. But the A-10, the Warthog, is a unique aircraft specifically designed for close air support, and it can stay longer, carry more. So it's just, they're making a big mistake. The airplane's been upgraded in the cockpit to what's called a Charlie model. It's got a glass cockpit now. It's got a lightning pod so that you can designate your smart weapons on your own rather than have another aircraft do it for you. But it's just it needs to be there.
So your early missions in Bosnia, tell us about the beginning for you of A-10 flying in Bosnia.
Well, when we first got there, it was Operation Deny Flight. So we were flying patrols over Bosnia just basically every day. We'd fly every day over Bosnia, working with the ground troops from all over the world. And then when the Serbs bombed and shelled Sarajevo marketplace in August of '95, that's when NATO finally got the courage to do something, and we turned into Operation Deliberate Force, which we then started flying airstrikes against the Serbs. And it was really interesting. I led one of our first strike that morning in August. And we took off at 2 o'clock in the morning after about 30 minutes of sleep, and found our tankers in a pitch black night. Nothing like the sound around. Found our tankers, and then we went into our orbit points off of Croatia. And about that time, Magic, who was the AWACS aircraft, called me. My call sign was Mako 27. Said, Mako 27, go green. And I went green, which is secure radio. And they said, you're authorized weapons free, which meant we were going to war, basically, is what it meant. And of course, I authenticated them just to make sure that it wasn't somebody trying to fool us. And then I came back onto our tactical frequency, and I told our flight, I said, proceed you to targets as brief, God be with us, and off we went.
How often were you shot at? What happened that day that first mission?
Well, that was a pretty interesting morning. My target was the largest armored repair facility in all of the Balkans near Sarajevo in a town called Hadici. And my wingman, Dan Peabody, he was an attorney, so we called him Counselor. So Counselor and I proceeded over to the target. I checked in with the French Foreign Legion, Disney 6, who was the guys on the ground. And Disney authenticated me, and I authenticated him, and it was a clear day. I had the target, and I rolled in on the target, and from about 28,000, and I was
still dark, or are you in daytime now?
It was daytime. It was right at dawn, actually. It was just after dawn. And I rolled in, I locked up the tread assembly building, which was my target, and just as I started to squeeze the Maverick off, and the Maverick, for those of you who don't know, it's a infrared guided missile. We could flip a switch on the inboard throttle of the A-10, and you'd get a video picture would come up, and you saw what the missile saw. So you could then slew and lock onto your target, which I did, and I'm just getting ready to release, and Counselor starts yelling at me, nomad, Sam, break. And Dan had never seen a real Sam. He didn't have any combat time, so normally when you tell somebody that, you tell them which way to break, but Dan was a little bit tense at that point, and so it was just an instantaneous decision for me, and I broke hard right, and fortunately it was the right way, and I picked up the missile as it was coming up, and I was able to defeat that missile, and then before the morning was over, I had 6 SAMs fired at me and 4 anti-aircraft sites. 3 of the anti-aircraft sites were silenced by British artillery off of Mount Igman, and then I took on this one anti-aircraft site that was out of their range, and it was like the gunfight at the OK Corral. I had tracers going by my canopy and flak going off, and I turned my gun on, and I started engaging him from about 9,000 feet away, and fortunately I hit him before he hit me, and then I decided, to get the hell out of town.
How many more missions did you fly in a Warthog?
In Bosnia, I flew another 42 missions.
Right. Michael, Mogadishu, what were we doing there? Mission.
So initially, it was actually a humanitarian relief operation. The Somali people.
What year was this? Sorry. What year?
In '92, we entered Somalia, just before Christmas of '92, and it was really just provide security for relief organizations. I was not personally involved at that point. And then over about a 6-month period, the mission started to expand in scope and essentially became a manhunt. And that's when we got involved, because that's kind of one of the missions that we usually take on within the special operations world. So our rehearsals and our focus was on being able to go into the city and capture, as it turned out, a list of 50 individuals that the UN wanted apprehended.
What is the crew of, now this is your helicopter, right? Or an updated version of it?
Yeah, it's not mine, but...
Well...
But I do have one, but it's not a Mike model.
But the Black Hawk, how many on the crew? And
typically in the Army, it's a crew of 4. It doesn't have to be. I mean, you can just fly with 2 pilots if you want to. But typically for tactical missions, a crew of 4, 2 pilots, 2 crew chiefs.
So what happened that day?
So it's the 7th mission that day you're referring to, I'm assuming, is Black Hawk Down, October 3rd, 93. Right. The mission that day is to go capture 2 top 10 personnel we'd already captured the number 2 guy, and we'd captured 25 others. So we had 26 already in prison in a 6-week period. So it had gone pretty well. We hadn't lost any people and hadn't lost any aircraft. But this particular day, we knew was going to be different. There was 4 things about it. One, worst part of town. If you put a pin on the map, the place you do not want to go in Mogadishu, that's where the mission was. Number 2 is daytime, so we can't use our night vision technology, and we can't really hide as well, obviously, in the dark. Number 3, we've done it 6 times before, so they're starting to learn what our tactics are, and they're doing things to be more effective against that. And the last one is you can't land Blackhawks in the street. This part of the city, the streets are too narrow. So it's okay going in because we can fast rope people in. Means you throw ropes out the side and they slide down the ropes. Easy, in fact, it's probably better than landing. The issue comes with extraction. So we can't air land the Blackhawks, which means we've either got to get everybody off rooftops, which is not a good idea because rooftop extraction, you've been on the target now for probably a half an hour, attracted a lot of attention. You come in and land on the roof. I mean, you think about it, it's kind of hard to articulate here, but picture a helicopter up over the top of that screen. Anybody in this whole area can shoot at it. Whereas if you land it in here, you have the natural cover of the buildings around you. So if you want, in an urban environment, if you can air land, you want to do it. So we decided we're not going to extract with helicopters. We're going to extract with ground vehicles, which was the right answer. So we go in, the mission's going okay. Couple little things happened. We did have a Ranger fall from an aircraft, which, to most people wouldn't be a little thing, but, in the conduct of an operation like that, you just fix the problem and move on. About 40 minutes in, we lose our first aircraft, and it was Super 6-1.
And how many aircraft were there?
There were over 20 on the mission, and plus about 4 fixed-wing assets overhead. So, I mean, these are pretty complicated little missions. The first Blackhawk is shot down, and what they're doing is they're orbiting the target, not a 30 millimeter gun, but a gun with a high rate of fire. It's 7.62, but we could shoot 4,000 rounds a minute with it. So much more firepower than the troops on the ground have on their own. It's why they love close air support and why they like helo support, because we can bring some real firepower to the fight. So he's in tight, circling the target, and gets shot down by an RPG. So a few other things happened. We had a search and rescue bird get shot down. It went in to try to help that down crew. They get hit by an RPG. So that's when I got called in to replace that first aircraft. So when you get called in to replace somebody who just got shot down, I mean, it's not going to be a good day, and we knew that going in, but we also know the guys on the ground, they need the support. They're being pummeled and they're surrounded, and they're not going to get out of there if we don't help them suppress the enemy fire. So we roll in. We made it around about 3 times when we got hit by an RPG. And the RPG hit, that's the tail rotor on the back there. The nose, if you're not familiar with helicopters, is this pointy end over here on the left. The tail rotor keeps you from spinning. The RPG hit just underneath that big round gearbox casing that you can see right there. And it essentially blew everything off from that point up. The tail rotor left the aircraft completely, which in a Blackhawk is not a good thing. We were at low altitude, low airspeed, spun violently. The only thing you can do in that situation is shut the engines off, which is not something you really want to do either. But you have to get control of the aircraft. So we did. Ray Frank, my co-pilot, actually did it because a Blackhawk, if you get up close enough to see, the engine control levers are up overhead. They're not on the controls. So I'm flying. He's getting the engines off. And somewhere during that process, we hit the ground. And the only thing I'm trying to do is keep from flipping upside down, which I was able to do somehow. And we hit on the gear, which is the only reason I'm still here. And you mentioned, dust off pilots from Vietnam. Not only, did they set the culture for Army aviation, them and all helo pilots in that war, but there's so many lessons learned from a technology perspective that if you parked a Huey here and you went side by side, you could talk about, Blackhawk's got 2 engines. Blackhawk's got redundant flight controls. It's got redundant electrical systems, hydraulic systems. It's got self-sealing fuel lines. All of that stuff came out of lessons learned from Vietnam, things that, would have saved lives had they been in place then that are in these airframes today, part of why I'm here. And it all works exactly as advertised.
So when you hit, how many? There were 4 of you on board at the time?
Yes.
So when you hit, who was injured? Anyone?
Oh, we were all injured very bad. Yeah. I broke my, even though those landing gear will strut or attenuate the crash, and the seat does the same thing. It has shock absorbers on it. We hit so hard that my right femur actually snapped off on the seat, just the pure G-forces of the impact. And then my vertebrae were crushed in my spine. Not the discs, but the actual bones themselves smashed into each other, and one compressed 30%, so the compression fracture is. So I had pretty serious injuries, and then obviously was unconscious for probably 5 minutes.
How quickly were you surrounded?
Well, onesie, twosie Somalis started coming in right away, but 2 Delta Force commandos, Randy Sugart and Gary Gordon, were overhead, and they saw that something had to be done or we're going to be lost, and they volunteered to go in. And I don't think you can ever fully appreciate the significance of that act. You're looking down. I often ask myself, if I was in their shoes, would I have done that? It's hard to, you don't know. There's no way to know. But they did, and not only did they volunteer, but they were told no initially. And then finally, one of them got on the radio directly to the command center and said, if you don't let us go in, these guys are gone. And they were given permission. They dropped off, and they came up alongside.
How did they get down?
Super 6-2, another Blackhawk, got as close as they could, and Gary and Randy maneuvered on the ground to finally get to our
Did
site.
they rope down? Or
I think they jumped. I think they were able to get down to about 8 feet, and they jumped out.
Right. Now, they came to your protection, right?
Right.
And what happened then?
So they arrived on the side of the aircraft, and I knew them. So I'm thinking somehow there's a rescue force here. This is over. Not knowing it's just 2 guys, and that's the next reinforcements don't get there for 8 hours. So we were on our own for the long haul. Didn't know it. So I'm optimistic at this point. But we fought the enemy off for, I'd say, maybe 15 minutes. Gary Gordon goes down first. Randy then comes back around, and I think at that point, it's just me and Randy. I don't think anybody else is left. I've shot all my ammunition. He gives me Gary's weapon. He grabs the crew chief's weapons from the aircraft and goes back around and makes his last stand. They estimate, there's hundreds of Somalis here. So it's a matter of seconds before he just can't hold them all off. So he's killed, and then they overrun the site. Initially, pretty certain they're going to kill me because they're all out of control, angry and violent, and there's nothing you can do. I mean, you can't run, you can't hide, got no ammunition left. So I basically accepted my fate. So they descended on me and started to beat me to death. I mean, they broke my nose, my cheekbone, my eye socket. They were ripping all my gear off. And I had been to survival school. It's one thing, another lesson learned from Vietnam. We didn't historically send Army aviators or ground force to survival school prior to deploying to combat. But post-Vietnam, all of our special forces, of which I technically was qualified as, went to survival school. So I went to survival school where they teach you as much as they can what you're supposed to do in these situations. And they basically tell you, make the best of it. Don't make it any worse than it already is. So I essentially did my best to just roll with the punches and not antagonize them anymore. They realized I had value as a prisoner, stopped the madness, fired shots in the air, got control of the mob, and brought me into captivity.
And what happened in captivity?
Well, it's no picnic either. They teach us in survival school, it doesn't matter how hungry, tired, thirsty you are, evasion is way better than captivity. And it is, but captivity is better than death, I guess. So I was shot in captivity on the next day. They didn't care about my injuries. They were throwing me around like no litter, nothing, just throwing me in cars. My femur went out the backside of my leg at some point in that process. They did a video interrogation, which most people recognize when they see it. Aired on international television. But over time, doing some of the things they taught me in survival school, they began to be more, I don't want to say kind, but not as hostile. And it got to the point where I don't think, even if their orders were to kill me in the event of a rescue attempt, I'm not sure they would have, because they just kind of got to know me, you know, and developed almost a relationship with me, because I mean, you spend 11 days with somebody 24/7. I guess they become human to you if they weren't in the beginning.
To what extent do you think they were already in the process of negotiating or trying to take advantage of the fact that you were captured?
Well, I don't really think they had a plan. It didn't seem like they had a plan initially. It seemed somewhat chaotic. And then when they made the video and it aired, obviously everybody knew that I was in captivity. But then the president sent the former ambassador, a gentleman named Robert Oakley, who the Somalis really...
President of the United States.
The president of the U.S. sent Robert Oakley to Somalia. And the Somalis really liked Robert Oakley. I've always said, if we had 1,000 Robert Oakleys out there in the world, we wouldn't have half the trouble we have, because he was a great statesman. He was a straight shooter. They trusted him, and he met with them, and he said, you got two choices. And I heard him tell this story to me more than once. He said, I told him you could keep him in captivity, or you can let him go. If you keep him, sooner or later we're going to figure out where he is, and we're going to come rescue him. And when we do, we're coming with everything we got. And there was, you know, AC-130s and fighters and carrier battle group all had been brought in to put this bonfire out now. And he had credibility, so when he said that, the Somalis said, I think the best course of action is let him go. And within 48 hours, they let me go.
Wow.
Thanks.
Wow.
And I don't know if we're going to circle back, but Randy Sugart and Gary Gordon were posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, and I just want to make sure that gets into the conversation.
Right. Yeah, that goes back to what you described about the decision that they made in, you know, countering their commanders and said, no, we're going. You know, Jim, back to you in Afghanistan. We've covered from Vietnam to Afghanistan. What was your mission over Afghanistan? What were you flying?
Well, at that point in time, I was already retired from the military, and I got a phone call one day, and they asked me if I would be willing to volunteer to go fly MC-12Rs, which is your King Air 350 turboprop, and fly reconnaissance. And I was actually attached to the 101st Airborne, so I actually did make it to the Army.
I told you.
Yeah, see, best was last.
Made your day, right?
Yeah, that was it. And but our mission was highly classified, obviously. Most of the time I worked with a SEAL or a Delta Force, working all the equipment in the back that was very sensitive. And our mission was to recon and basically identify and locate guys that were being sought after. And we pretty well covered all of Afghanistan. My last 10 missions there was all up on the northern border, northeastern border in the Hakeem area, which is a very bad area. All of Afghanistan was a bad area. And my last 10 missions, like I said, were there, and the data that we were gathering was being sent. And when I got home, about 2 weeks after I got home, they announced that they had taken out 24 of the top Taliban leaders, and it was exactly where I was.
Well,
So, but that was it. It was reconnaissance.
you know, going back to Vietnam, when you were flying those missions in the Bird Dog, I mentioned in the film Laos and Cambodia, but we weren't in Laos and Cambodia, were we?
No, sir.
That's what I thought, yeah. Michael, looking back over your military career, what are your reflections?
I think the people that you work with, you're not going to hear a different answer from anybody that's ever been in uniform. Yeah, they're great machines, and it's a great mission, and you know, there's a lot of elements to it that you have fond memories of, but it's the people, no question.
Jim?
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I think I miss the most, and Michael's probably share this, is I miss the camaraderie of the squadron. And the guys that you fly side by side with, you know, they're like your brothers.
And by the way, after we finish our part of the program here, and in a few minutes with a walk around the airplanes, Michael's going to be in the bookstore to sign copies of his In the Company of Heroes book. So he'll be there just a little bit later. Questions from the floor? Questions? Anybody? Thinking? Anybody? Got
There we
a
go.
question?
There's
Yes, sir.
I can hear it. He's asking about what about the movie Black Hawk Down? Most common question, by the way, if no one was going to ask a question, that's the one I would throw out. I say it's accurate enough. It's not perfect, but if you watch the movie, it gives you a good sense of what actually happened. The biggest deviation is the combined characters. So sometimes you'll see one character in the movie doing something that actually happened, but it was actually that guy over there. And the reason they do that is they can't develop 25 characters in a feature film. They got to focus on a handful. So they take the actions of several and put them into one person, and that person becomes a superhero, and everybody else is, you know, honorable mention. But that's just the way the movie making business is. Yeah.
Any other questions? Questions? Yeah, we got one. Good.
Jim, what were your dates in 211?
I was there from June of 1968, and I rotated home in September of '69.
Any other questions? Sam Bass, our colleague here. We got one over here. We'll get it.
Nomad, if you could go back and change anything, would you?
What would you change if you could go back and change anything in your career?
One of the, and it's a very long story that I won't bore you with, but one of the names on the side of that airplane is Lieutenant Jim Reese, who was a very dear friend of mine. And he was a hooch mate. His bunk was next to mine. And Jim had a few libations the night before. And anyway, long story short, I went down to ops and said I want to take Reese's mission and he can fly mine later. And I was just getting up when Jim woke up and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I'm gonna fly your mission. You go ahead and get some sleep." I said, "The weather's really lousy anyway." And he said, "No, I'll get my, I'll fly my mission." And I said, "Well, you dummy, just go back to sleep. I've already got it all set up." And well, anyway, he got up and got dressed. I said, "Well, I'll at least have breakfast with you." And I went down and had breakfast with him. And I was scheduled to relieve him a little later. Anyway, long story short, I took off early to try and relieve him, and I couldn't find him, and he had been shot down and killed, and I guess probably out of my entire career, I wish that I had tried harder not to get him to fly that mission.
Yeah, right. Michael, any thoughts on the same subject?
Well, you know, if you're talking about things you can control, I would say no. If you're talking about things you can't control, then obviously I would change the fact that, you know, some folks didn't come home. That would be the thing that I would change. But I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. It's amazing stuff, and changed who I am, and I would absolutely, unhesitatingly do it all again.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'd go back right now.
You know, if there's any spirit, and there are many spirits here at EAA, this seems to be the predominant one of people who have decided it's important to use their lives to protect our freedoms, make our country better, and like you just heard, they would go back and do it again. So, gentlemen, thank you both very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
And now Sam Bass with Paul Wood, who owns this A4, and Jim and Michael are going to talk about their aircraft as well.
So we can start out with Jim. Jim, let's start with your airplane because this is the furthest one away. And just tell me a little bit about the specs on the airplane.
Well, the Bird Dog, it's obviously a reconnaissance aircraft. It's slow. It's very slow. But it has a 213 horsepower Continental engine in it. It has about, on a good day, about 4.5 hours endurance. It's unarmed, although we carried Willie Pete rockets to mark our targets with, and actually flew with the windows open so we could hear them shooting at us. And then I'd shoot back with an AK-47 and then throw hand grenades out the window at them, which surprised a lot of North Vietnamese. And it's a good, solid airplane. It flies well once you get it in the air. The biggest boo-boo about this airplane, or the biggest challenge about this airplane, is landing it. It only weighs about 2,400 pounds gross weight, and so it sometimes can kind of get away from you. And it has a history of being ground loopable, which means the airplane kind of turns around on you, and that's about it. It's a very dependable airplane. You only cruise about it. You know, if you see 120, that's a good day. And other than that, lands about 70 miles an hour, takes off at about 50. And other than that, that's a Bird Dog.
Well, you mentioned that you had a 6-month tour because there were so many losses. How many airplanes did you figure you lost in the Vietnamese war in Southeast Asia?
Our squadron alone lost 6 aircraft, 6 Bird Dogs.
And there was almost 500 total lost.
Total over 500, counting the Air Force and the Army Bird Dogs.
Okay, now you mentioned the hard points on there. That you really didn't, other than the AK-47, that was the only thing you had that you could shoot back with, right?
That was it, yes, sir.
Now, were they kind of reluctant to shoot at you because they knew that if you saw where they were shooting, you were going to sick the big boys down on them, right?
Yes, sir. They knew that we had friends in high places, and they would only open up on us, like you said, if they knew that we had spotted them, and then they'd do everything they could to bring us down.
Now, you didn't fly in the Ravens, but you had some interconnection with the Ravens. Could you
Absolutely.
just talk a little bit about that?
The Ravens were an amazing bunch of guys. They were on the Air Force called the Steve Canyon program, and it was all, super secret in Laos. And I had a couple of really good.
We weren't
buddies.
in Laos, were we?
No, sir, we weren't. I had a couple of good buddies that were Ravens, and when I was flying the A4, I flew a number of missions over there where the Ravens were our control our facts.
Okay, now the significance of your paint scheme on here.
This aircraft is identical to the one that I flew in Vietnam. It's in the same markings as my squadron, VMO 6, Marine Observation Squadron 6. And 41 is actually the tail number of one of the airplanes that I actually flew. And it kind of corresponds, our call sign was Fingerprint, and I was Fingerprint 41.
Well, let me ask you this. Of course, you've got all this vast experience in the different services. What does it mean to you when you fly this airplane to these air shows and the veterans come up and they look at this thing and they're very nostalgic about it?
It is a wonderful thing to see the veterans come up and they say, you know what, this airplane saved my bacon. And either that or I have young people come up that want to know, well, what did you do with this airplane? And they don't really understand. But it still is a reminder of the sacrifices that were made. And I think that's important. Like Paul has the A4, and Michael has the Black Hawk and the Bird Dog and all of the warbirds that are here that, it's just freedom ain't free, folks. And I don't care what anybody says. It's a price that has to be paid. And a lot of people are forgetting that.
Well, thank you for your information on this one here. And this is Paul's airplane here, and this is Paul Wood. And Paul is the founder of the Warbird Heritage Foundation in Waukegan, Wisconsin. He flies the F-86, the A-4, L-39, and the T-2 Buckeye of jets. He flies some other airplanes also. And this is his airplane, and I'd like for both of you to stand here and Jim over here also, because we'll talk about Jim flying it in combat. And tell us a little bit about your airplanes for the specifications on it.
Well, sure. The Douglas A4 was originally designed to take over the duties of the Douglas A1 Skyraider, which was a carrier-based ground attack airplane. And the designer of the airplane was a guy by the name of Ed Heinemann. And so his idea was to design a very light, very nimble airplane that could be launched off carriers and have a predominant role in ground attack and drop bombs and fire rockets on ground attack targets. And it ended up being a phenomenal airplane. It had lots of nicknames: the Bantam Bomber, the Scooter, and Heinemann's Hot Rod. And it's a testament to the maneuverability of the airplane that it got all these nicknames. So I think it is supposed to have dropped more bombs in North Vietnam than any Navy carrier-based airplane in the course of the war. Is that right? That's true. Yeah. So.
And I also understand that there was only one of these that was lost in air-to-air conflict. Isn't that correct? During the Vietnam War.
Well, they lost a lot of them. I think they lost 350 or 60 of them.
Yeah, but I think that was the only one that was
ground fire.
Yeah, it was all ground fire. Okay. Now, how many of these were built?
Just under 3,000, I think, 2,962.
Well, how many are you still flying now?
In civilian hands, there are 2 single-seaters, and then there, I think, are 4 TA-4s in civilian hands. Then there are some government contractors that have A-4s that are still doing red air support out of Nellis or training JTACs and things like that, but they're on DoD contracts. So civilian owners, there's only just a handful.
Now, this is in Navy livery, but the Marines also flew this airplane, right?
Correct. Yeah, they did.
So now, how many squadrons did you have of Marines? Do you remember?
The Marine Corps had about, probably at the time, 10 squadrons.
Okay. How about the armament on it?
Well, it had, I think, 3 hard points, but you probably tell a little bit more about the armaments, I think, than I could.
Well, the Charlie model and the Bravo models had 3 hard points on it. The Echo model that I flew in Vietnam had 5. And most of the time, depending on the missions we were fragged for, you'd carry 500-pound bombs, which could either be a snake eye, which is a retard bomb that gives you time to get separation from the explosion. It's delivered at a very high rate of speed at a very low altitude, much more precise than dropping dumb bomb. It's a dumb bomb.
Right.
Or you'd fly the 500-pounders with the slicks, or we'd carry Zuni rockets or napalm. And we had the 20-millimeter cannons.
And it would carry almost half the load of the B-17 would in the Second World War.
It actually carry more than the B-17.
More than the B-17?
Yeah, it'd carry about twice as much as a B-17.
Okay, good. So I had heard that before, but somebody said half, and I thought, well, that's a little strange.
No, it was about twice the amount.
Now tell me about this. Could be used also for a tanker, and it's kind of amazing that a little airplane like this can be a tanker.
Yeah, I think they put a buddy store on the centerline pylon, right? And so if they needed a tank, they could send someone up with I don't know how large the tank was.
370, about 375 gallons, and it had a drogue system, which is, how the Navy Marines we refueled with the like the probe there.
Right.
And yeah, we had tankers that would, go up and refuel birds coming back. Most of the time in Vietnam, we had KC-130s as tanker aircraft that we go plug into.
All right, Paul. Now, this is in the Navy livery. Tell me the significance of this particular paint scheme and Lieutenant Schwartz's name is on the side.
Sure, absolutely. Well, as we talked about earlier, the A4 was a ground attack airplane, and it was never really originally designed for any air-to-air combat, although in later versions they used a lot, the A4s a lot in air-to-air. But at the time, Lieutenant Commander T.R. Schwartz was flying off the Bonhomme Richard, and he was in Yankee Station, and he was part of what's called an Iron Hand mission, which was flak suppression in front of a major strike. And he was loaded up with 5-inch Zuni rockets under the rails,
And interestingly, he had no 20 millimeter ammunition because he was restricted on weight. So his job was to go in and find flak sites, roll in on them, take the flak sites out ahead of the main strike force, and then come back home. And he didn't have any bullets because he wanted to save weight for takeoff. So he was rolling in on his first flak site, and his wingman said, "Hey, TR, you got MiGs left 7 o'clock." And so he rolled off his target and came around behind the MiGs and fired off all his 5-inch Zuni unguided rockets and shot down a MiG. And so he's credited with the only air-to-air kill by an A4 in all of Vietnam. And so we put, I mean, it was just, these are dumb rockets that just, you know, go like that. They're meant to be unguided air to ground, and he actually got lucky and hit one. And so he's got the only kill air-to-air in Vietnam. So that's, we're honoring him with his paint scheme.
Well, I'll ask you the same question I asked Jim. What does it mean to you to bring this airplane to these air shows and let these veterans see this airplane? And many times it's the first time they've seen it since they've, you know, they're out of combat.
Yeah, well, our museum has about 12 airplanes right now, the A4 being one of them, and our whole objective is to fly these airplanes and take them to air shows so that people who maybe did not serve in the military can see, not only see them, but hear them and smell them and see the smoke and hear the sounds and watch how fast they are and that sort of thing. And it's just our way of honoring the veterans who served and the heroes, both men and women in the military that flew and maintained these things to just keep our country free. And I think that's something that I want to do and all the people affiliated with our museum want to do. And we're very active about it. And it's a way to pay tribute to these great heroes. So,
well, Jim, we really Jim, Paul, we really appreciate what you're doing for the warbird community here, and we really appreciate you bringing your airplane. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Now let's go over and then talk to Michael and let Michael tell us about this helicopter, which I don't know anything at all about. Michael, tell us a little bit about the specifications and what was it designed for originally?
So
a lot of memories with this airplane.
It should be on.
still on? Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So this particular Black Hawk is a UH-60 Mike model, which is the newest one that the Army has fielded. The original Black Hawk, which goes back to the late 70s, was actually developed to replace the Huey. Now, I know a lot of us have a close relationship with the Huey, and rightfully so. It's an iconic aircraft. But it's been around for a while, and the Black Hawk replaced it in the Army for the assault and general utility role. That's what the UH stands for.
Okay, and you said they took a lot of lessons from Vietnam about redundancy and that sort of thing. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Could you get into that just a little bit?
Sure. So you can see from where you sit that there's 2 engines. So that's the first difference. There are 2 twin-engine Hueys, but most of them out there in the world are single engine. So that's obviously an improvement. This thing's got, as I mentioned earlier, 2 hydraulic systems. It's got 2 electrical systems. It's got the crash attenuation of the landing gear. If I could remember my operator's manual, I would know exactly the feet per second that this will attenuate, but I don't remember. But you can hit pretty hard, and the landing gear will absorb the impact. It has self-sealing fuel lines. One of the major contributors to loss of life in the Vietnam era design was post-crash fires. You got people who are hurt, they can't get out of the bird, and the aircraft catches on fire. These aircraft are designed, the fuel lines break away, there's no fuel spillage. So when I regain consciousness, it's like somebody shut the aircraft down because the fuel lines all broke off, but the fuel didn't leak anywhere. So that one feature saved my life right there. So all those things come out of lessons learned. You got ballistic fuel tanks in this aircraft. What else you got? Obviously, some of the more recent design changes. This particular version has a digital moving map. It has integrated communications, some additional things that are more, I would say, enhancements for the task of flying the thing, not moving the sticks, but getting where you need to go. But in terms of the real kind of nuts and bolts, big improvements, I think I hit the highlights. It obviously it's faster, carries more weight. What's the max sling on these now? 8,000 or 10,000? 9,000. So you can put 9,000 pounds on the hook. A Huey, I think, was 4. So, huge improvements there. And that's all driven by ground force requirements. When the Huey was flying, you're hauling a Jeep around. With this thing, you're hauling a Humvee around, which is pushing $8,000 with stuff in it. So you've got to improve your air capability to support changes that occur with the ground force.
Now, what kind of armament do you have on this thing?
So the normal Black Hawk, again, it was designed as a utility helicopter, but it is a multi-role helicopter if you want to use it that way. So an assault Black Hawk will have door guns mounted here that the crew chief or door gunner will utilize during infiltrations and exfiltrations or whenever other times are needed. I had a very good fortune to be in special operations where we had the latitude to do some other stuff. So going all the way back to the late 80s, we armed ours into an attack helicopter configuration. So we modified the minigun mounts to where they were fixed forward. So we end up with a gun that is pointing forward, basically right here, one on each side, and each of those fires up to 4,000 rounds at 7.62. We put 30 millimeters on wings. These hard points here, you can mount wings. We put the same gun that's on the Apache. The Apache has a nose 30 millimeter. Right. We put 30 millimeters on the wings. The beauty of this is we could put two of them. So we could put a 30 on each side and the same magazine that the Apache has inside feeding them. I don't remember. I think it's 1,100 rounds per magazine. Not as big as that A10 30 millimeter. That 30 millimeter in an A10 is a giant round, but ballistically it's a 30 millimeter round. We also put Hellfire missiles on it. So you could put, if you wanted to, 16 Hellfire missiles on this thing. In fact, I personally fired the first Hellfire off a Black Hawk out in Nevada back in the late 80s. Again, there's just so many things you can do with it. We put rocket pods on it. Rocket pods have 19 shots each. You got 4 stations, so you're talking 4 19-shot rocket pods if you want to, or any of those combinations in between. Usually we would go 30 on one side, rocket pod on the other side, and then the 2 miniguns fixed forward for attack helicopter configuration.
Now, when you went on a mission, how long would you be up?
So the other thing that we did is added internal auxiliary tanks. So this aircraft's probably got about 2 hours and 20 minutes of endurance at normal operating speed and weight. We put a whole nother set of fuel tanks inside to basically double that. So we could go 4 hours and 20 if we wanted to. We actually had a configuration where there were 6 of them in there, and you could fly up to maybe 8-9 hours without refueling, but that's all you're doing is hauling gas. At that point, you're not hauling anything else.
With all of these guns and the rockets that you had on there in the special forces, were you firing all the guns, or did you have somebody, the co-pilot or whatever?
No, we're firing them all
from the right side, didn't you?
Either
right
one.
seat?
You could sit left seat or right seat. Yeah. So we're doing the flying and the shooting. Okay. And then the other thing, you're talking about fuel. We put refuel probes on the front of ours. It looks just like that on the end, but it's much bigger and longer because we got to get out beyond the radius of these rotor blades. So in a Black Hawk, the refuel probe actually extends. It sits in a fixed position where it's probably about, 4-6 feet sticking out. And then when you're ready to use it, it extends another, probably 6 feet to get out near the end of the rotor blades. And then we follow C-130s because...
With the Drogan probe?
Correct. Because only the C-130 is slow enough to get to speed where we can keep up with it. You can't do it off a KC-135 or a KC-10.
And I imagine with the weather bad, that's kind of dicey, isn't it?
It's actually diciest on a nice sunny afternoon, because what happens on nice sunny afternoons out there in airspace? Turbulence. Yeah. And you're trying to get in tight with this drogue that's doing this. It actually has to come in under the rotor blade tips. So you're trying to, and you can't just sneak up on it. You gotta strike it. Right. And on those sunny afternoons when it's really bumpy, it's very difficult to do it. It's a lot easier at night or when the weather's a little more stable.
Is there anything else you'd like to add on this, being I don't know anything about helicopters?
Well, I think the folks that fly it are going to tell you this is the greatest helicopter ever been built. I mean, these things have been around for 30 years now. They're probably going to be around for 30 more. It is an absolutely fantastic machine. It was designed right in the beginning. We've made incremental improvements all the way that keep making this thing better. Guys that fly the Mike model, I'm sure would tell you, it's got some great enhancements that they really like over the earlier versions of the aircraft. And it's highly reliable. In the times that I was operational, I can think of maybe only 2 times when I went out there to launch and was not able to take off because of an aircraft malfunction. So, fantastic machine.
Right. Michael, thank you. I admire you greatly.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors, and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks' Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth, and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.